Angela Carter ignited a cultural revolution by rewriting Western culture's defining legends, the myths, recognizing the magical powers inherent in proper storytelling, an act that goes beyond mere narrative alteration and extends to the very fabric of reality. In her tale, The Lady of the House of Love, Carter subverts traditional vampiric norms, fundamentally altering the rules of vampirism. The Lady of the House of Love, a vampire and descendant of Vlad Tepes, epitomizes a beautiful damsel longing for humanity, but ensnared in a vampire's body. As World War I looms, a British Army officer arrives at her abode, representing a stark departure from the decadent past of the vampire dynasty. Young, healthy, and rational, he embodies the future. His heroism, oddly derived from a lack of imagination, becomes evident in the narrative. His rationality and unyielding logic serve as a shield, saving him from the delicate vampire's claws. This vampire, yearning for love, loses herself in the process. The Lady of the House of Love symbolizes the collapse of the old world, a paradigm shift where the aristocracy gives way. However, the narrative leaves a lingering question: giving way to what? With World War I on the horizon, the impending changes herald a world that will no longer harbor the same fear of vampires. Eventually, the revenants became so troublesome that the villagers abandoned their homes, leaving the village solely in the possession of subtle and vindictive inhabitants. These beings reveal their presence through shadows that fall slightly amiss, even at midday. Shadows without a discernible source. The eerie atmosphere extends to the sound of sobbing in a dilapidated bedroom, where a cracked mirror fails to reflect any tangible presence. Travelers, unwise enough to pause at the square's fountain gushing spring water from a faucet in a stone lion's mouth, experience an unsettling sense of unease. A cat prowls in a neglected garden, grinning, spitting, arching its back, and recoiling from intangible entities on 4 fear-stiffened legs. Consequently, the village below the chateau is avoided by all, as a beautiful somnambulist perpetuates her ancestral crimes within. Draped in an antique bridal gown, the beautiful queen of the vampires sits alone in her dark, lofty residence. Portraits of her demented and atrocious ancestors watch over her, projecting a malevolent posthumous existence through her. Engaged in a solitary ritual, she counts tarot cards interpreting a constellation of possibilities. It's as if the random fall of the cards on the red plush tablecloth before her could transport her from the cold, shuttered room into a realm of perpetual summer, erasing the enduring sadness of a girl who embodies both death and the maiden. Her voice resonates with distant sonorities, akin to reverberations in a cave, repeatedly intoning, "Now you are at the place of annihilation. Now you are at the place of annihilation." She herself is a cavern filled with echoes, a system of repetitions, a closed circuit. Contemplating the nature of creativity, she poses, "Can a bird sing only the song it knows, or can it learn a new song?" With a long, sharp fingernail, she draws across the bars of her pet lark's cage, producing a plangent twang reminiscent of plucked heartstrings from a metallic woman. Her hair cascades down like tears. While the castle primarily houses ghostly occupants, she maintains her own suite with a drawing room and bedroom. Barred shutters and heavy velvet curtains staunchly repel natural light. A round table on a single leg, covered with a red plush cloth, serves as the stage for her inevitable tarot readings. The room's illumination is perpetually dim, courtesy of a heavily shaded lamp on the mantelpiece. The dark red figured wallpaper bears the distressing patterns left by rain, penetrating the neglected roof, leaving random stains resembling ominous marks on sheets from past lovers. Rot and fungus pervade the space, with an unlit chandelier burdened by dust, obscuring its prisms. Industrious spiders have woven canopies in the corners, ensnaring porcelain vases on the mantelpiece in soft gray nets. Unperturbed, the mistress of this disintegration remains oblivious to the surroundings. Seated in a moth-ravaged burgundy velvet chair at a low round table, she deals the tarot cards. Occasionally the lark sings, but more often it remains a sullen mound of drab feathers. The Countess may wake it for a brief cadenza, by strumming the bars of its cage, relishing the announcement of its inability to escape. As the sun sets, she rises and promptly heads to her table, engaging in a game of patience until hunger transforms into a ravenous appetite. Her beauty is so striking that it defies nature. It's an abnormality, a deformity devoid of the imperfections that usually accompany the human condition. Her flawless features are symptomatic of her disorder, her soullessness. The tenebrous belly's white hands adeptly deal the hand of destiny. Her fingernails, longer than those of ancient Chinese mandarins, are sharpened to fine points. These, along with teeth as sharp and white as sponge sugar, serve as visible markers of the destiny she seeks to avoid through arcane means. Her claws and teeth, honed on centuries of corpses, trace their lineage back to Vlad the Impaler, who feasted on the deceased in the Transylvanian forests. Within her bedroom, the walls are adorned with black satin embroidered with tears of pearl. Funerary urns and bowls, emitting slumberous pungent incense, occupy the room's corners. In the center, an elaborate catafalque in ebony is surrounded by long candles in enormous silver candlesticks. Wearing a blood-stained white lace negligee, the Countess climbs onto her catafalque at dawn each morning and reclines in an open coffin. Her wicked father, staked out at a Carpathian crossroad by a chignoned priest of the Orthodox faith before her milk teeth emerged, declared with his dying breath, "Nosferatu is dead. Long live Nosferatu." Now she commands the haunted forests and mysterious abodes of his vast domain. As the hereditary leader of the army of shadows camping in the village below her chateau, they take on various forms: owls, bats, and foxes. They curdle milk, make butter refuse to churn, ride horses all night on a wild hunt, reduce them to skin and bone by morning, and milk cows dry. Most notably, they torment pubescent girls with fainting fits, blood disorders, and diseases of the imagination. Yet, the Countess remains indifferent to her bizarre authority, as if she were merely dreaming it. In her dream, she yearns to be human, uncertain if such transformation is possible. The tarot consistently reveals the same configuration, depicting la papesse, la mort, la tour abolie, wisdom, death, dissolution. On moonless nights, her keeper releases her into the garden, a somber place resembling a burial ground. Roses planted by her deceased mother have grown into a spiked wall, enclosing her within the castle of her inheritance. When the back door opens, the Countess sniffs the air and howls, dropping on all fours. Crouching and quivering, she catches the scent of her prey, relishing the crunch of fragile bones. Returning home, she whimpers with blood smeared on her cheeks, washing her face with the fastidious gestures of a cat. The voracious nightly hunts in the gloomy garden, with crouching and pouncing, surround her habitual tormented somnambulism, her imitation of life. Her eyes enlarge and glow, claws and teeth striking and gorging. Yet nothing consoles her for the ghastliness of her condition. She turns to the magic comfort of the tarot pack, shuffling the cards, constructing hypotheses about an irreversible future. An old mute cares for her, ensuring she never sees the sun, stays in her coffin all day, and avoids mirrors and reflective surfaces, fulfilling the functions of vampire servants. Everything about this beautiful and ghastly lady fits the role of the Queen of the Night, the Queen of Terror, except her dreadful reluctance for the role. However, if an unwary adventurer lingers in the deserted village square to refresh at the fountain, a crone in a black dress and white apron emerges, inviting with smiles and gestures. The adventurer follows, unaware that the Countess desires fresh meat. In her youth, she contented herself with baby rabbits and small creatures. Now, as a woman, she hungers for men. Lingering by the fountain, you might be led to the Countess's larder, where her dark desires find satisfaction. Throughout the day, she lies in her coffin wearing a negligee of blood-stained lace. As the sun sets, she yawns and stirs, donning her mother's wedding dress, the only garment she possesses. She then sits to read her tarot cards until hunger strikes. Despite her loathing for the food she consumes, hunger overpowers her, leading her to sink her teeth into the necks of unsuspecting victims, dropping the deflated remains with a small cry of pain and disgust. She wishes to take rabbits home, nurture them, and create a nest in her chinoiserie escritoire, but hunger compels her to feed on living beings. Ignorant or foolhardy shepherd boys and gypsy lads who come to wash at the fountain meet a similar fate. The Grim Reaper card always adorns the drawing room table where the Countess, in satin finery, serves them coffee and sugar cakes, putting them at their fatal ease. The stillness in her eyes reveals her inconsolable state as she yearns to caress their cheeks and stroke their hair. After the macabre encounter, her governess tidies the remains, wrapping them in discarded clothes before discreetly burying them in the garden. The Countess's blood-streaked cheeks are mixed with tears, and her keeper meticulously cleans her fingernails with a silver toothpick, removing fragments of skin and bone. In the midst of this dark routine, a young British Army officer, blonde, blue-eyed, and heavy-muscled, arrives in Romania during a hot summer. With a sense of humor, he decides to explore the land of vampires on a bicycle. Unaware of the gothic eternity awaiting him, he embodies the ambiguity of virginity, ignorance, potential power, and a unique connection to a generation marked by the impending fate of the trenches in France. This being, rooted in change and time, is on the verge of colliding with the timeless existence of vampires, where all remains as it has always been, and their cards fall in an eternal pattern. Despite his youth, the young officer is rational, having chosen the most logical mode of transport for his journey around the Carpathians, the bicycle. Riding a bicycle serves as a form of protection against superstitious fears, as it is the product of pure reason applied to motion. Geometry, a tool of reason, is harnessed for the benefit of man. The bicycle, a contribution to human welfare, emits no harmful fumes and allows only decorous speeds. How could a bicycle ever be an instrument of harm? A single kiss awakened the sleeping beauty in the wood. The Countess's waxen fingers, resembling those of a holy image, reveal the card called Les Amoureux. Never before has the Countess dealt herself a fate involving love. Trembling and shaking, her large eyes close beneath finely veined, nervously fluttering eyelids. For the first time, the lovely cartomancer has cast a hand of love and death. Be he alive or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. As evening takes on a mauvish hue, the English gentleman labors up the hill toward the village he spotted from a distance. The path is too steep to ride, so he dismounts and pushes his bicycle before him. Hot, hungry, thirsty, weary, and dusty, he hopes to find a welcoming inn for the night. However, his initial disappointment sets in as he discovers the dilapidated state of the cottages, roofs caved in, tall weeds piercing through fallen tiles, and shutters hanging disconsolately. The village appears entirely uninhabited, with rank vegetation whispering like foul secrets, almost conjuring twisted faces beneath the crumbling eaves. Yet, the adventure and the consolation of hollyhocks bravely blooming in shaggy gardens, along with the beauty of the flaming sunset, gradually overcome his disappointment and assuage his faint unease. The fountain, where village women once washed their clothes, still gushes out bright, clear water. Gratefully, he washes his feet and hands, drinks from the faucet, and lets the icy stream run over his face. Raising his dripping head from the lion's mouth, he finds an old woman standing silently in the square. She smiles eagerly, almost conciliatorily, wearing a black dress with a white apron and a housekeeper's key ring at the waist. Her neatly coiled gray hair peeks from beneath a white linen headdress. She curtsies at the young man and gestures for him to follow. When he hesitates, she points toward the imposing mansion above them, looming over the village. Rubbing her stomach, pointing to her mouth, and rubbing her stomach again, she mimes an invitation to supper. Then, with determination, she beckons him again, turning on her heel as if brooking no opposition. As they departed from the village, a great, intoxicated surge of the heavy scent of red roses blew into the young man's face, inducing a sensuous vertigo. A blast of rich, faintly corrupt sweetness strong enough almost to fell him. The path was lined with enormous thickets bristling with thorns, bearing an excess of roses. The flowers themselves, with their huge congregations of plush petals and tightly budded cores, seemed almost obscene in their luxuriance. The mansion emerged reluctantly from this jungle. In the subtle and haunting light of the setting sun, the somber visage of the place, part manor house, part fortified farmhouse, immense and rambling, perched like a dilapidated eagle's nest atop the crag, evoked childhood tales of ghost stories. The memories of winter evenings spent scaring himself and his siblings with such tales came rushing back. Standing before the door of time-eroded oak, he felt a sense of regret, almost wishing he hadn't accepted the crone's unspoken invitation. Yet, as she selected a huge iron key from her clanking ring, he brusquely reminded himself that he was no longer a child to be frightened by his own fancies. The old lady unlocked the door, which swung back on melodramatically creaking hinges, and took charge of his bicycle, despite his protests. Watching his symbol of rationality vanish into the dark entrails of the mansion, he felt an involuntary sinking of the heart. He knew it would likely end up in a damp outhouse, where they wouldn't oil it or check its tires. However, committed to the journey, he stepped over the threshold of Nosferatu's castle, his youth, strength, and blonde beauty, making him impervious to the invisible, even unacknowledged pentacle of his virginity. The young man did not shiver in the blast of cold air, as if from the mouth of a grave, emanating from the lightless, cavernous interior. The crone led him to a small chamber with a black oak table covered by a clean white cloth, carefully laid with heavy silverware, slightly tarnished, as if tainted by foul breath, but set for only one. It grew curiouser and curiouser. Invited to the castle for dinner, he found himself dining alone. Nevertheless, he sat down as she had bid him. Though it was not yet dark outside, the closely drawn curtains allowed only sparing light to trickle in from a single oil lamp, revealing the dismal surroundings. The crone bustled about to fetch him a bottle of wine and a glass from an ancient cabinet of wormy oak. As he bemusedly drank his wine, she disappeared briefly, but returned bearing a steaming platter of the local spiced meat stew with dumplings and a shank of black bread. Hungry after his long day's ride, he ate heartily, polishing his plate with the crust. However, the coarse food was hardly the entertainment he had expected from the gentry, and he puzzled over the assessing glint in the mute woman's eyes as she observed him eating. She hurried off to get him a second helping as soon as he finished the first, and her friendliness and helpfulness assured him of a bed for the night in the castle, in addition to his supper. He sharply reprimanded himself for his own childish lack of enthusiasm for the eerie silence and clammy chill of the place. After consuming the second plateful, the old woman gestured for him to leave the table and follow her once again. She pantomimed drinking, indicating that he was now invited to partake in after-dinner coffee in another room, with a more distinguished member of the household who had chosen not to dine with him, but still wished to make his acquaintance. Considering it an honor, he straightened his tie and brushed the crumbs from his tweed jacket in deference to his host's opinion of himself. He was surprised to discover the ruinous state of the house's interior: cobwebs, worm-eaten beams, crumbling plaster. The mute crone resolutely led him through endless corridors, up winding staircases, and past galleries where the painted eyes of family portraits briefly flickered as they passed, belonging to faces of quite memorable beastliness. Eventually, she paused, and behind the door where they halted he heard a faint metallic twang, perhaps a chord struck on a harpsichord. Then, wonderfully, the liquid cascade of a lark's song reached his ears, bringing the freshness of morning to the heart, unknowingly in the heart of Juliet's tomb. The crone rapped with her knuckles on the panels, and the most seductively caressing voice he had ever heard softly called out, in heavily accented French, the adopted language of the Romanian aristocracy, entree. At first he saw only a shape, faintly luminous, catching and reflecting what little light there was in the ill-lit room. This shape resolved into that of a hoop-skirted dress of white satin draped with lace, a dress 50 or 60 years out of fashion, but once intended for a wedding. Then he saw the girl wearing the dress, a fragile figure with the thinness of a moth's skeleton. She seemed so frail that her dress appeared to hang suspended in the dank air, a fabulous lending, a self-articulated garment in which she lived like a ghost in a machine. The room's only light came from a low, burning lamp with a thick, greenish shade on a distant mantelpiece. The crone shielded her lantern with her hand, as if protecting her mistress or their guest from too sudden exposure. Gradually, as his eyes adjusted to the half-dark, he perceived the beauty and extreme youth of the bedizened scarecrow. He thought of a child dressing up in her mother's clothes, perhaps a child adorning herself in the garments of a deceased mother to bring her, however briefly, back to life. The Countess stood behind a low table beside a pretty, silly gilt-and-wire birdcage, hands outstretched in a distracted attitude, almost as if in flight. She looked as startled by their entry as if she had not requested it. With her stark white face, resembling a death's head, surrounded by long dark hair that fell straight as if soaking wet, she appeared like a shipwrecked bride. Her huge, dark eyes conveyed a waif-like, lost look that almost broke his heart. However, he felt disturbed, almost repelled, by her extraordinarily fleshy mouth. Wide, full, with prominent lips of a vibrant purplish crimson. A morbid mouth that, for a moment, brought an unsettling thought to him. One he promptly dismissed, a mouth that seemed to belong to a woman of the night. She shivered constantly, a starveling chill, a malarial agitation of the bones. Despite her apparent youthfulness, He estimated her to be only 16 or 17 years old, with the hectic, unhealthy beauty of a consumptive. She was the chatelaine of all this decay. With tender precautions, the crone raised the light she held to show his hostess her guest's face. In response, the countess emitted a faint, mewing cry and made a blind, appalled gesture, knocking against the table, causing a butterfly dazzle of painted cards to fall to the floor. Her mouth formed a round O of woe. She swayed and then sank into her chair, seemingly barely capable of moving. It was a bewildering reception. Skiing under her breath, the crone found a pair of dark green glasses, like those worn by blind beggars, and perched them on the countess's nose. He went forward to pick up her cards from the carpet, part rotted away and encroached upon by virulent-looking fungi. He shuffled the cards carelessly, for they meant nothing to him. A grisly picture of a capering skeleton caught his eye, which he covered up with a happier one of two young lovers smiling at each other. He put the cards back into a hand so slender that the frail net of bone beneath the translucent skin was almost visible. The hand had fingernails as long and finely pointed as banjo picks. At his touch, she seemed to revive a little and almost smiled, raising herself upright. "Coffee," she said. "You must have coffee," and scooped up her cards into a pile so that the crone could set before her a silver spirit kettle, a silver coffee pot, cream jug, sugar basin, and cups on a silver tray. A strange touch of elegance, even if discolored, in this devastated interior whose mistress ethereally shone as if with her own blighted, submarine radiance. The crone found him a chair and, tittering noiselessly, departed, leaving the room a little darker. While the young lady attended to the coffee making, he had time to contemplate with some distaste a further series of family portraits decorating the stained and peeling walls of the room. These livid faces all seemed contorted with a febrile madness, and the blubber lips, the huge, demented eyes that all had in common bore a disquieting resemblance to those of the hapless victim of inbreeding, now patiently filtering her fragrant brew, even if some rare grace had finally transformed those features in her case. The lark, its chorus done, had long ago fallen silent. No sound but the chink of silver on china. Soon she held out to him a tiny cup of rose-painted china. "Welcome," she said in her voice with the rushing sonorities of the ocean in it, a voice that seemed to come from elsewhere than her white, still throat. "Welcome to my chateau. I rarely receive visitors, and that's a misfortune since nothing animates me half as much as the presence of a stranger. This place is so lonely now. The village is deserted, and my one companion, alas, she cannot speak. Often I am so silent that I think I too will soon forget how to do so, and nobody here will ever talk anymore." She offered him a sugar biscuit from a Limoges plate. Her fingernails struck carillons from the antique china. Her voice, issuing from those red lips like the obese roses in her garden, lips that do not move, her voice is curiously disembodied. She is like a doll, he thought, a ventriloquist's doll, or more like a great ingenious piece of clockwork, for she seemed inadequately powered by some slow energy of which she was not in control, as if she had been wound up years ago when she was born. And now the mechanism was inexorably running down, leaving her lifeless. This idea that she might be an automaton, made of white velvet and black fur that could not move of its own accord, never quite deserted him. Indeed, it deeply moved his heart. The carnival air of her white dress emphasized her unreality, like a sad Columbine who lost her way in the wood a long time ago and never reached the fair. And the light. I must apologize for the lack of light, a hereditary affliction of the eyes. Her blind spectacles gave him his handsome face back to himself twice over. If he presented himself to her naked face, he would dazzle her like the sun she is forbidden to look at, because it would shrivel her up at once. Poor night bird, poor butcher bird, vous serez ma proie. You have such a fine throat, monsieur, like a column of marble. When you came through the door retaining about you all the golden light of the summer's day of which I know nothing, the card called Les Amoureux had just emerged from the tumbling chouse of imagery before me. It seemed to me you had stepped off the card into my darkness, and, for a moment I thought, perhaps, you might irradiate it. I do not mean to hurt you. I shall wait for you in my bride's dress in the dark. The bridegroom has come. He will go into the chamber which has been prepared for him. I am condemned to solitude and dark. I do not mean to hurt you. I will be very gentle. And could love free me from the shadows? Can a bird sing only the song it knows, or can it learn a new song? See how I'm ready for you. I've always been ready for you. I've been waiting for you in my wedding dress. Why have you delayed for so long? It will all be over very quickly. You will feel no pain, my darling. She herself is a haunted house. She does not possess herself. Her ancestors sometimes come and peer out of the windows of her eyes, and that is very frightening. She has the mysterious solitude of ambiguous states. She hovers in a no-man's land between life and death, sleeping and waking. Behind the hedge of spiked flowers, Nosferatu's sanguinary rosebud. The beastly forebears on the walls condemn her to a perpetual repetition of their passions. One kiss, however, and only one, woke up the sleeping beauty in the wood. Nervously, to conceal her inner voices, she keeps up a front of inconsequential chatter in French, while her ancestors leer and grimace on the walls. However hard she tries to think of any other, she only knows of one kind of consummation. He was struck once again by the bird-like predatory claws that tipped her marvelous hands. The sense of strangeness that had been growing on him since he buried his head under the streaming water in the village, since he entered the dark portals of the fatal castle, now fully overcame him. Had he been a cat, he would have bounced backward from her hands on 4 fear-stiffened legs, but he is not a cat. He is a hero. A fundamental disbelief in what he sees before him sustains him. Even in the boudoir of Countess Nosferatu herself, he would have said, perhaps, that there are some things which, even if they are true, we should not believe possible. He might have said, "It is folly to believe one's eyes," not so much that he does not believe in her, he can see her, she is real. If she takes off her dark glasses, from her eyes will stream all the images that populate this vampire-haunted land. But, since he himself is immune to shadow, due to his virginity, he does not yet know what there is to be afraid of, and due to his heroism, which makes him like the sun. He sees before him, first and foremost, an inbred, highly strung girl child, fatherless, motherless, kept in the dark too long and pale as a plant that never sees the light, half blinded by some hereditary condition of the eyes. And though he feels unease, he cannot feel terror. So he is like the boy in the fairy tale, who does not know how to shudder and not spooks ghouls beasties. The devil himself and all his retinue could do the trick. This lack of imagination gives his heroism to the hero. He will learn to shudder in the trenches. But this girl cannot make him shudder. Now it is dark. Bats swoop and squeak outside the tightly shuttered windows. The coffee is all drunk, the sugar biscuits eaten. Her chatter comes trickling and diminishing to a stop. She twists her fingers together, picks at the lace of her dress, shifts nervously in her chair. Owls shriek. The impedimenta of her condition squeak and gibber all around us. Now you are at the place of annihilation. Now you are at the place of annihilation. She turns her head away from the blue beams of his eyes. She knows no other consummation than the only one she can offer him. She has not eaten for 3 days. It is dinner time. It is bedtime. Suivez-moi. Je vous attendais. Vous serez ma proie. The raven caws on the accursed roof. Dinner time, clang the portraits on the walls. A ghastly hunger gnaws her entrails. She has waited for him all her life without knowing it. The handsome bicyclist, scarcely believing his luck, will follow her into her bedroom. The candles around her sacrificial altar burn with a low, clear flame. Light catches on the silver tears stitched to the wall. She will assure him, in the very voice of temptation, "My clothes have but to fall, and you will see before you a succession of mysteries." She has no mouth with which to kiss, no hands with which to caress, only the fangs and talons of a beast of prey. To touch the mineral sheen of the flesh, revealed in the cool candle gleam, is to invite her fatal embrace. In her low, sweet voice, she will croon the lullaby of the house of Nosferatu. Embraces, kisses your golden head, of a lion, although I have never seen a lion, only imagined one. Of the sun, even if I've only seen the picture of the sun on the tarot card. Your golden head of the lover whom I dreamed would one day free me. This head will fall back. Its eyes roll upwards in a spasm you will mistake for that of love and not of death. The bridegroom bleeds on my inverted marriage bed. Stark and dead, poor bicyclist. He has paid the price of a night with the Countess, and some think it too high a fee, while some do not. Tomorrow, her keeper will bury his bones under her roses. The food her roses feed on gives them their rich color, their swooning odor, that breathes lasciviously of forbidden pleasures. Suivez-moi, suivez-moi. The handsome bicyclist, Fearful for his hostess's health, her sanity, gingerly follows her hysterical imperiousness into the other room. He would like to take her into his arms and protect her from the ancestors who leer down from the walls. What a macabre bedroom. His colonel, an old goat with jaded appetites, had given him the visiting card of a brothel in Paris where, the satyr assured him, 10 louis would buy just such a lugubrious bedroom, with a naked girl upon a coffin. Off stage, the brothel pianist played the Dies Irae on a harmonium, and, amidst all the perfumes of the embalming parlor, the customer took his necrophiliac pleasure of a pretended corpse. He had good-naturedly refused the old man's offer of such an initiation. How can he now take criminal advantage of the disordered girl with fever-hot, bone-dry, taloned hands and eyes that deny all the erotic promises of her body with their terror, their sadness, their dreadful balked tenderness? So delicate and damned, poor thing. Quite damned. Yet I do believe she scarcely knows what she is doing. She is shaking, as if her limbs were not efficiently joined together, as if she might shake into pieces. She raises her hands to unfasten the neck of her dress, and her eyes well with tears. They trickle down beneath the rim of her dark glasses. She can't take off her mother's wedding dress unless she takes off her dark glasses. She has fumbled the ritual. It is no longer inexorable. The mechanism within her fails her now, when she needs it most. When she takes off the dark glasses, they slip from her fingers and smash to pieces on the tiled floor. There is no room in her drama for improvisation, and this unexpected mundane noise of breaking glass breaks the wicked spell in the room, entirely. She gapes blindly down at the splinters and ineffectively smears the tears across her face with her fist. What is she to do now? When she kneels to try to gather the fragments of glass together, a sharp sliver pierces deeply into the pad of her thumb. She cries out sharp, real. She kneels among the broken glass and watches the bright bead of blood form a drop. She has never seen her own blood before, not her own blood. It exercises upon her an awed fascination. Into this vile and murderous room, the handsome bicyclist brings the innocent remedies of the nursery. In himself, by his presence, he is an exorcism. He gently takes her hand away from her and dabs the blood with his own handkerchief. But still it spurts out, and so he puts his mouth to the wound. He will kiss it better for her, as her mother, had she lived, would have done. All the silver tears fall from the wall with a flimsy tinkle. Her painted ancestors turn away their eyes and grind their fangs. How can she bear the pain of becoming human? The end of exile is the end of being. He was awakened by lark song. The shutters, the curtains, even the long-sealed windows of the horrid bedroom were all opened up and light and air streamed in. Now you could see how tawdry it all was. How thin and cheap the satin, the catafalque not ebony at all, but black painted paper stretched on struts of wood, as in the theater. The wind had blown droves of petals from the roses outside into the room, and this crimson residue swirled fragrantly about the floor. The candles had burnt out, and she must have set her pet lark free because it perched on the edge of the silly coffin to sing him its ecstatic morning song. His bones were stiff and aching. He'd slept on the floor with his bundled-up jacket for a pillow after he'd put her to bed. But now there was no trace of her to be seen, except lightly tossed across the crumpled black satin bed cover, a lace negligee lightly soiled with blood, as it might be from a woman's menses, and a rose that must have come from the fierce bushes, nodding through the window. The air was heavy with incense and roses and made him cough. The Countess must have got up early to enjoy the sunshine, slipped outside to gather him a rose. He got to his feet, coaxed the lark onto his wrist and took it to the window. At first it exhibited the reluctance for the sky of a long-cage thing, but when he tossed it up onto the currents of the air, it spread its wings and was up and away into the clear blue bowl of the heavens. He watched its trajectory with a lift of joy in his heart. Then he padded into the boudoir, his mind busy with plans. We shall take her to Zurich, to a clinic. She will be treated for nervous hysteria, then to an eye specialist for her photophobia, and to a dentist to put her teeth into better shape. Any competent manicurist will deal with her claws. We shall turn her into the lovely girl she is. I shall cure her of all these nightmares. The heavy curtains are pulled back to let in brilliant fusillades of early morning light. In the desolation of the boudoir, she sits at her round table in her white dress, with the cards laid out before her. She has dropped off to sleep over the cards of destiny that are so fingered, so soiled, so worn by constant shuffling, that you can no longer make the image out on any single one of them. She is not sleeping. In death, she looked far older, less beautiful, and so, for the first time, fully human. I will vanish in the morning light. I was only an invention of darkness. And I leave you as a souvenir the dark-fanged rose I plucked from between my thighs, like a flower laid on a grave. On a grave. My keeper will attend to everything. Nosferatu always attends his own obsequies. She will not go to the graveyard unattended. And now the crone materialized, weeping, and roughly gestured him to be gone. After a search in some foul-smelling outhouses, he discovered his bicycle and, abandoning his holiday, rode directly to Bucharest where, at the Poste Restante, he found a telegram summoning him to rejoin his regiment at once. Much later, when he changed back into uniform in his quarters, he discovered he still had the Countess's rose. He must have tucked it into the breast pocket of his cycling jacket after he had found her body. Curiously enough, although he had brought it so far away from Romania, the flower did not seem to be quite dead and, on impulse, because the girl had been so lovely and her death so unexpected and pathetic, he decided to try and resurrect her rose. He filled his tooth glass with water from the carafe on his locker and popped the rose into it so that its withered head floated on the surface. When he returned from the mess that evening, the heavy fragrance of Count Nosferatu's roses drifted down the stone corridor of the barracks to greet him, and his Spartan quarters brimmed with the reeling odor of a glowing, velvet, monstrous flower, whose petals had regained all their former bloom and elasticity, their corrupt, brilliant, baleful splendor.